Good morning and welcome to Sunday Morning Beers.
Good morning.
This is kind of the second edition. The first edition of this, there's going to be two editions this Sunday. The first edition was a little long, and it will be strictly on Facebook, which allows for longer videos. And then the version that we're doing right now will be on both YouTube and Facebook. So make sure you check both of those out. With us, once again, our special guest, Lily, the cat, who is really pushing herself to be kind of a co-host, I guess. I guess it would be really more of like a round table with three of us on the show.
I suppose. But she doesn't really talk a lot.
No.
I think it's more of like she just wants to be in the limelight.
She likes the camera time,
Yeah.
but she is very pretty, so there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
And she doesn't ask for a cut of the royalties, and there aren't any to give her anyways.
No.
So that's fine with us.
And she's nice and warm.
Mm-hmm.
She keeps my lap warm.
Let's talk about the beer that we have. We've already drank quite a bit since this is multiple takes of this. But something very unique. I know it's very cliche to drink a Dogfish Head beer because when a lot of people think about craft beer, they think about Dogfish Head. And that's fine. That's good for them, because their beers are good, no doubt about it. But we just, we kind of try to give a little something to other people because they're big enough. But this is Miles Davis Bitches Brew. And if you think that seems kind of weird that they would do that, this artwork that you see on here is actually Miles Davis, the legendary jazz musician, had an album called Bitches Brew. This is actually the cover artwork on there. I think the name Bitches Brew is much more suited to a beer than it is to a jazz album. But either way, a very unique beer, very, very hyped beer when it came out. They actually talked about this in the show that they had on TV there for a while, the Dogfish Head show that was on TV. And what's in here is it's a blend of Tej, which is an African mead, and unlike most meads, they don't want just the pure sweetness of the honey in the Tej, so they use in their Rhamnus prenoides, also known as shiny leaf buckthorn, and in Ethiopia they refer to that as gesho, and that's what it says on the label here, the gesho. Those leaves of the buckthorn are bitter, and so it kind of cuts that sweetness. What Dogfish Head did was they made their own version of Tej, and then they blended it with an imperial stout. So if you see here why this is black, and if you ever had mead before, you say, well, that shouldn't be looking like that.
That's stout.
It's the two parts. It's 2 parts imperial stout, 1 part Tej. So that's what it is. We've already had it, but we're going to taste it again just for your benefit. What it is
bitter.
It's very coffee-like. It tastes like somebody put too much coffee grounds and not enough water in the coffee pot.
And we were saying it's acidic. It's very
yeah,
acidic.
well, that flavor of just the too much coffee, the acidic, the roasty bitterness, that is by far the dominant flavor in there. There is the faintest of hints of honey in there, which I don't think most people would even get.
This would be really good with chocolate, like to pair it with chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you had a nice
I can think of a couple things you could pair this with that would be good.
Caramel, something sweet against the bitterness. But the coffee, you pick that up.
Well, I can think this a few things that this would be good with food-wise, as both a pairing and a contrast of the flavors in here. But by itself, not to say that it's horrible, it's really, it makes you thirsty. It really does, because it is just so dry and acrid.
It's a sipper. It's not a guzzler.
No, by any means. Probably a little disappointing for the big hype surrounding it. But if you get a chance to share it with somebody, I wouldn't go out and pay the big bucks for that bottle just for yourself. But it's worth checking out for sure by any means.
It's unique.
And speaking of unique. We want to tell you about what's going on Thursday at 4th Street Brewery. We're trying to make the show a little bit more than just what's going on at 4th Street Brewery, but there are some time constraints. And we do have something very interesting going on Thursday, so I think it's worth talking about. We have 2 beers on Thursday. The first beer we have is called Secondhand IPA. And after thinking about it, probably wasn't the best name because it's really more than a secondhand. You may know that a few months ago we were able to get our hands on some used whiskey or bourbon barrels from a small distillery in Texas. It's called Balcones is the name of the distillery, and they make something very unique. It's a blue corn whiskey or bourbon. It's the only one of its kind in the whole world. Blue. It's called Baby Blue, and they sell the used barrels because with bourbon and whiskeys they only use them once, and then it's either throw them away. Probably at one time they just threw them away or sold them as planters, but now breweries and wineries want to get their hands on those barrels. So we got our hands on some of those barrels, and the first set of barrels that we got, we put a Beer Enormous Imperial Stout in, aged it in there, served it for New Year's Eve, and then courtesy of Chris Stiles, we actually got 2 more barrels because he didn't want the bourbon character in there. He wanted us to use them to get the bourbon character there. We put more Beer Enormous in there and did that again for St. Patrick's Day. But going back to the first set of barrels that we had, after I took the Beer Enormous out of there, I actually fermented a beer in there and inoculated it with wild yeast, and that was called Barrel of Funkies. It was a very, very good beer that we had recently. And then after taking that out of there and doing nothing more than just a light rinse, I put some Tasman Bay IPA in there, filled the barrels up with Tasman Bay IPA. And so you're talking about a barrel that had blue corn whiskey, Beer Enormous, a wild yeast beer, and now an IPA in there. So this beer has a lot of complexity to it. It's got, if you have a very sophisticated palate, you might get a little bit of the bourbon character in there. Mostly what you're going to get is that very nice oaky flavor. You're going to get a little bit of that wild yeast in there. Not sour, if you're not a sour beer fan, don't think that. Just kind of more of a yeasty fruitiness. And then of course you're going to get a whole lot of that unique bitter IPA character out of this secondhand IPA. So there's only 10 gallons of it. You're definitely going to not want to miss it. Make sure you come on Thursday. And then we also have a very cool cask conditioned lager, Up North Pilsner, which is a rye Pilsner aged on pecan wood. So 2 very, very unique beers in small quantities. Definitely going to want to come in there on Thursday and check them out. Even more unique than this beer that we're drinking here, which is much more famous than 4th Street Brewery for sure. But come on Thursday and check out 2 really cool beers. So a lot of other things going on. We'll see you at 4th Street Brewery this week, for sure on Thursday, and hopefully more than that. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Have a great week.
Take care.